Okay, let's recap. So remember, we're here to show that the Bible it's one story. It's one unified story. It's not a bunch of teeny stories that have nothing to do with each other and our little character studies and applications. It's really one story. So we started out, I had Noah draw because he's better than me. We started out in this garden in the presence of God with all these gifts in this crazy creation, walking with God. And that is the goal of creation. It's called the kingdom of God. It's called the city of God. It's called the mountain of God. Those terms are interchangeable, more or less. We fall from grace. We fall from his presence by eating of the tree and deciding that we will define good and evil. We are exiled past the cherubim, flaming sword, to the east, down from the mountain of the Lord. And we are now waiting for some sort of seed of the woman, mysteriously, to conquer this enemy and get us back into God's presence. From there, we see the first set of offspring. We have hope that maybe this seed of the woman will be the seed that will deliver us. But the brothers, one murders the other and is exiled even farther to the east. There's also this mysterious thing called sacrifices, an altar and sacrifices with these brothers that we haven't really seen a reference to, right? So if we use the Bible to interpret itself, and you come across altar and you're like, I don't know what that is. It hasn't been in Genesis 1 and 2. What is this thing? And we kind of think it's this is what ancient people did, I guess. We're going to get into that a little more. But that's where we're at so far, is the people of God are now moving farther away, and now Cain's even farther east, and he builds a city on a plain and names it after his son. There's also one little line about having another brother named Seth. Okay, so there's hope. There's hope that somehow the seed of the woman is going to continue, probably not through Cain. He's seed of the serpent, but maybe through this other brother. Okay, so one story, and now we get to the flood. First, we stop so Genesis 4, Cain and Abel, bad news bears. Genesis 5 is a genealogy. And when we read the genealogy, the question that we're thinking is, it's so-and-so was begat by so-and-so, and he lived X years and he died, and so-and-so was begat, and you're kind of like, skip. But there's little clues, hidden little descriptors that matter. We won't go into too many of those. And two, you're supposed to be thinking, where is the seed? And like generation after generation just dies and dies and dies and dies. And you're just like, where is the seed? And are these people wondering the same thing? Are they wondering, where is the seed? We're all living off of God's mountain, multiplying, and there's no seed. So I'm going to read from Genesis 6 today, after that genealogy in chapter 5 that shows none of these guys are the seed. We're going to get to Genesis 6. I'm going to read a translation I have on the screen. So we'll use this as a reference. You can flip open if you want as well. But Tim Mackey put together a literal translation because he knows Hebrew, and he's showing what the actual words literally mean, and it reads kind of funky, but it helps understand the context in a really big way. So we're going to use that today. So genealogy ends, and it rolls into, it came about when humanity began to multiply on the face of the land, and daughters were born for them, and the sons of Elohim saw the daughters of humanity, that they were good, and took wives for themselves, whomever they chose. And Yahweh said, my ruach, which is spirit or breath, is the word, or wind, spirit, breath, wind, ruach, my spirit breath will not dwell with humanity forever, because he also is flesh, and his days will be 120 years. The Nephilim were in the land in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of Elohim went into the daughters of humanity, and they bore children for them. These are the mighty warriors who are from ancient time, men of the name. What's it say? Somebody read verse 1. in a different translation out loud.
When man began to multiply on the face of the land, and daughters were born to them.
Verse 2.
The sons of God saw that the daughters of men were attractive, and they took as their wives any they chose.
Okay, so similar. He translates God as Elohim in this case. So what we have here, and I just watched like a 40-minute exposition of this verse in super deep detail, explaining the Hebrew, explaining the terms through Scripture. I cannot do it justice, and we don't really have time. But Tim Mackey basically says, like, sons of Elohim, we're talking about angelic beings. We're not talking about humans. And he goes into the Hebrew and why, and he shows some things later. And he says, this is an angelic rebellion. So we've seen, so here's a quote from one scholar. Sons of God and daughters of men relates to a further attempt to break through the barrier separating the divine and the human sphere, following the frustrated attempt of the man and woman in Eden to achieve divine status. Which is an interesting take on this theme of humans wanting divinity, right? Adam and Eve are like, maybe I can have divinity, right? Now you have humans and celestial beings wanting to mate to achieve some sort of divinity. We will see in the next section on the Tower of Babel another attempt to achieve divinity. Like, we are, in some level, obsessed with becoming God. There's also a little theme here. You're like, really? Are these some sort of spiritual beings who are trying to take human women? And you see this angelic rebellion. You see the same thing in Sodom and Gomorrah, but it's backwards, right? You have these heavenly messengers. Angel means messenger. So you have these messengers of God, who are not humans, coming to stay with Lot. And all the humans in the city go pound on his door and say, give us their flesh. We want to do things. So you see this, like, corruption is just rampant, and it's so often with humanity manifested in an immoral or sexual status. But you see these themes. I want divinity, and I have this appetite. I'm going to gratify at all costs. That's how I can be God. Another interesting point here is this also shows not only is there corruption and rebellion from the image of God towards God with the garden, and then with Cain, and then with all these other people. Now you're seeing these celestial beings rebelling against God. So God creates all and gives gifts to all, and rebellion starts to spread everywhere, and everybody turns against the good Creator who gave life and gave gifts. Really interesting interpretation on the middle part here. My spirit breath will not dwell with him forever because he's also flesh. His days will be 120. I've always heard that, like, oh, this is like people were like super old, and then their age is going to now be 120. And like, I think there's some sort of relative truth to that. Like, people got a lot younger post flood, and but if you, depending on how scholars interpret things and how they do the math on Noah and the flood, from about the time God makes this statement with Noah, 120 years, I'm going to butcher this, basically 120 years from some point is when the flood and the reset happens. Like, there's 120 years of grace and opportunity left, and at that point, I will strive no more. We will be done with this failed creation experiment. The other, I wish I could have explained that better because I don't feel like I remembered exactly how he applied it, but it was an interesting thought on, and it fits the narrative like really, really well. Like, God's not trying to say, like, I don't want men and women to live as long. He's saying, like, angels and celestial beings and humans are now sleeping together. We can't do this forever. This is out of control. 120 years left. The clock is ticking, essentially. Okay. One question for you all. Now that we've been going through the narrative, is there anything in here you're seeing that harkens back to the first 4 chapters? Any hyperlinks, any language, any references that you're seeing as you're reading this in light of the story so far? Every time you read more of the story, you're supposed to be looking back and thinking. Anything in here that calls out from Genesis 1 through 4?
You mentioned that like they're trying to make themselves great again, like when Adam ate from the fruit of the tree.
Yep. You're like, oh, okay, this disease is still alive and well. Okay. Yep. How about the sons of Elohim saw the daughters of humanity, that they were good, and they took them. I've never picked up these little things where it's like, here's the pattern. Like Eve saw the fruit was good, and she took of it. And now you've got these celestial beings seeing the women of humanity and saying, that's good, and taking. I see it, I decide what's good and bad, and I will take. You're like, oh, that pattern of our heart, that curse is still alive and well. And then a lot of your translations, the last line here, they're mighty warriors from ancient time, men of the name. A lot of your translations probably say men of renown, right? But it's actually, the Hebrew literally says men of the name. And it's referring to what we just saw with Cain saying, I'm going to make a city and I'm going to name it after my son. So you have some sort of mighty being born from this like warped sexual encounter, this rebellious, proud sexual encounter. And these offspring are now, and somehow, superior, mighty, and continuing to be all about their own name and their own glory. And some of these are little things that like I don't learn unless I hear it from a scholar, because it's in the Hebrew and it's really hard to translate and then know that, oh, that's actually playing on chords here and playing on chords here. Okay. Yeah, the realm. So now we're seeing this terrible story. We see the realm outside of Eden's gate has steadily become the realm of death. The wannabe gods have warped our God-given power to rule and multiply, abusing power and sex, caving to a twisted love of self to make ourselves great and gratify our fallen desires at all costs. And the result is always the same: farther exile from God's presence. So what happens next in the story? And Yahweh saw that multiplied was the badness of humanity. That's what the Hebrew says. Multiplied was the badness. So we have this new rebellion saying, I see what's good. And God's saying, you're multiplying badness. And every purpose of the plans of his heart was only bad all the day. And Yahweh regretted he made humanity in the land, and he was pained in his heart. And Yahweh said, I will wipe away humanity that I created from the face of the ground, from humanity to animals, to creeping things, to birds of the skies, for I regret that I have made them. But Noah found favor in the eyes of Yahweh. These are the birth generations of Noah. Noah was a righteous one. I skipped some verses, I think, to make it shorter and to focus. Noah was a righteous one, blameless in his generation. Noah walked with Elohim, and Noah birthed 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And the land was ruined before Elohim, and the land was filled with violence. And Elohim saw the land, and behold, it was ruined, for all flesh had ruined his way upon the land. There's this great quote. I'm going to read a little bit more from Lois Verberg later. She's a Jewish Christian who has spent years studying scriptures from a Jewish perspective, from a Jewish cultural perspective, instead of a Western lens. She says this about this passage. In Hebrew, there's a connection between God's pain and that of fallen humanity. Because of Eve's sin, the tree, her sorrow, which is etzev in Hebrew, I'm sure I butchered that, but etzev is the Hebrew word. Her sorrow in bearing children will multiply. It says, Eve, your etzev will multiply in child's birth, your sorrow. And Adam will labor in sorrow, etzev, to make the earth produce food. So in Genesis 3:16 and 19, you see Adam and Eve both bearing this penalty of sorrow. This is the same word that describes God's sorrow when his heart is grieved. So in the highlight, he's pained in his heart. That's the word etzev for sorrow. Like Eve, God's precious children would now fill his heart with pain. And like Adam, his beautiful earth would now be cursed by human bloodshed. Adam and Eve's sorrows were a small taste of the pain God himself felt at his broken world. So when we read the story of the flood, what emotion do we imagine God having? Anger, right? What emotion is represented in the story? Is anger represented in the story? Yeah. He might have felt anger, but he chose in the word to reveal that he was pained in his heart, that he had sorrow in his heart. That's really, really important to know as we're trying to, we all have these, again, rat and chinchilla, we all have these false conceptions of God. And God has moments where he is angry and you see wrath and you see different things, but we want to really understand what is his perspective? Where is he coming from? He's looking at his whole creation and he's looking at the wickedness everywhere and he feels sorrow or pain in his heart. He feels regret. Okay, how about this one? What hyperlinks do you see tying back to Genesis 1-4 in this passage? Anyone?
The list of how he's going to wipe them away, is that backwards from how he created them?
Mm-hmm. Yep. It's like decreation, isn't it? He's like, I'm gonna wipe away everything. Boom, this. The same things that he made. Mm-hmm. Totally. Yep, that was the main one. He also, we're supposed to be fruitful and multiply. And what did we actually multiply? Badness, right? Badness. So interesting. Back in Genesis 5, in that kind of boring but important genealogy, it says Enoch, talking about Enoch in the long list, Enoch walked with God and he was not, for God took him. And that's all it says, which is really interesting because the last people to walk with God was Adam and Eve. And you're like, what does that mean? And it's this kind of mystical, I'm not sure, but there's something to it. But then Enoch is the great-grandfather of Noah. In Genesis 6:9, it says, I think I didn't add the references to the screen, but Noah was a righteous one, blameless in his generation. Noah walked with Elohim. So now you're like, whoa, okay, we're tracing the seed, and your great-grandfather walked with God, and now you're being defined as blameless and righteous, and you walked with God? What does that mean? That sounds pretty promising. Let's look at Psalm 15. This is referenced by scholars as the gate liturgy. Okay? And it opens this way. And the gate it's referring to is the gate. Eden's gate. It says, Yahweh, who may abide in your tabernacle? Who may dwell on your holy mountain? Hey, I know what we're like now. I know the story David wrote. I know what happened. I know that we were multiplying badness. Every desire of our heart's wicked. This bad news bears. He's like, who can abide back in your tabernacle? Who can get past this gate? Who can get back on your holy mountain? He's like, he who walks blamelessly, he and works righteousness. These are the two Hebrew words that describe Noah, right? Now, this was written way afterwards, but this is a are you the seed moment? So we're wondering now, is Noah qualified to ascend into God's presence? Is this the one? Poor Abel was killed. Enoch seemed promising, but he was taken up. But what about Noah? All right, we're going to find out. I think you already know the answer. All right, Genesis 6. And Elohim said to Noah, the end of all flesh has come before me, because the land is filled with violence because of them. And behold, I am going to ruin the land. Also, before I even read anything, can you tell from our chat on, was it Monday, how you're hearing and the land was ruined, and there was violence, and the land's going to be ruined, and because there's violence, and you're like, okay, you're kind of saying the same thing, but can you tell, it's written in paragraph form, but this is the sort of thing that if you saw a structure, you'd be like, oh, he's doing a chiasm and structuring things, and this is totally laid out in a very structured way. All right, make for yourself an ark of gopher trees, and you will make the ark with nests, and shall pitch it inside and out with pitch. This is how you will make it. 300 cubits length, 50 width, 30 height. You will make a window for the ark. You will finish it to a cubit from the top. You will set a door in the side. You will, I think I forgot a word, build it with lowers, seconds, and thirds. Decks. 3 levels, 3 tiers. And behold, I am going to bring the flood of water upon the land to ruin all flesh, which has in it the breath of life, from under the skies, and everything that's on the land will expire. Thomas Cole, The Flood. And it's just this peaceful, serene, but barren and empty, just reset. And you can just feel the drama of it. And right down here, in little detail, you see a skull. Everything has been wiped away, and there's the ark in the middle of this great reset. So the flood, and this is what you were after, was a decreation. There are no animals, there are no plants, there are no people. The land, there's barely any land. This has been a decreation event. Decreation is another theme in the Bible. Creation, decreation. It's a return to the waters of chaos in Genesis 1, is how we're supposed to be reading this. Whoa, flood and crazy waters and there's no life? Where have I heard about that? Oh, Genesis 1. Okay. Now, this is where it gets fun. The ark, would you be surprised if I told you that the ark is a reflection of the Garden of Eden and a foreshadowing of the tabernacle and the temple? You're like, that doesn't make any sense. It's a boat. How's a boat have anything to do with these things? Get ready to get your mind blown by ancient Hebrew authors. The ark, so we've got this decreation, new creation coming out of it with this little ark, and we're going to look at the parallels between the ark and the first Eden temple and the tabernacle and / temple to come. We're going to look at that right here. Number 1, I don't know who figures this stuff out. In the narrative, God speaks 10 times in the flood narrative, and he speaks 10 times in the creation narrative. He does these things where it's like the number of speeches match, and you're like, oh, this is like numbers are huge for conveying meaning. The ark has 3 decks, which suggest the 3 divisions of the tabernacle. We'll talk a lot about the tabernacle, but it's courtyard, holy place, holy of holies, and threefold layout of the Garden of Eden and the cosmos. So the cosmos is like the waters, the dry land, and the skies. And then you get to Eden, you're like the mountain and Eden, garden, center. Right? Now you've got this boat, and you know there's got to be all kinds of information missing in that description. That description to build this massive structure is like this long. So we're just getting what we need to get out of it, and what's in there is like, I want thirds, and I want it covered in pitch, and I want a door in the side. And you're like, okay, interesting. Each of the 3 decks of Noah's Ark was exactly the same height as the tabernacle and 3 times the area of the tabernacle court. Genesis 8:13, Noah removed the covering of the ark. The same word, Hebrew word miksa, was used for the animal skin covering of the ark and the tabernacle. The only 2 buildings God describes in the Pentateuch are the ark and the tabernacle. Both of those 2 things, the ark and the tabernacle, the initial Eden temple, the ark, and the tabernacle all come right after a flood, or right after chaotic waters. Chaotic waters, flood, Red Sea parting. And then you have this little temple in all 3 of those narratives. So you're seeing these elements across them. The ark is presented as a miniature cosmos, a little mini creation, a refuge, while the waters of chaos are all around it. Noah is a new Adam that dwells with animals in peace. Like, oh, we've got another man dwelling with animals. The ark comes to rest, Nuach, on the highest Ararat mountain, which is the same word, to rest, Nuach. It's the same verb that describes God's resting Adam in the garden. And you don't get this in English, which is a bummer. But Genesis 2:15, our translations say, the Lord God took the man and put him in the garden to work it and keep it. But in the Hebrew, it's the same word as in the ark, Nuach, it rested on top of a mountain. So what literally is saying in the Hebrew in Genesis 2 is, the Lord took the man and rested him in the Garden of Eden. And you're like, oh, big parallel. Genesis 8:1, and Elohim caused a spirit wind to pass over the land, and the waters subsided. The Spirit of God, in Genesis 1, the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters. So waters of chaos, and both times, Spirit of God comes over the top of it. Like Mount Eden, which we learned is a mountain, the ark comes to rest on the mountains of Ararat. So you've got these mountaintop experiences. And then Genesis 9:1, God blessed Noah and his sons and said to them, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. Genesis 1:28, and God blessed them and said to them, be fruitful and multiply. All right, the flood is a reset of this fallen, multiplied death, wickedness, carnage, rebellion. God resets a new man with animals, with the heavenly blessing to be fruitful and multiply, starting over out of chaotic waters on top of a mountain. It's the exact same story. We're all taught as children, like, there's animals on a boat. And you're like, this is a crazy story. This is about restarting the world with, man, maybe Noah is the promised one. This is creation 2.0. We're going to get it right this time. Tim Mackey. God provides a safe refuge for his divine image and animals who live together in peace in this divine refuge, which is on the surface of the waters and become the birth of a whole new creation. Okay. Whew. We're only halfway through the flood story. Okay? Let me just pause for a second. Any reactions to that? Any questions about that? Any hands if you're like, I had no idea that this was Eden 2.0? Anybody? Yeah. I get bummed. Like Tim Mackey explains all this, and that book explains it. I'm like, how did I not know this? This is crazy. I'm like, oh, angry God is just punishing people. Like, next story. And it's like, no, heartbroken God is like, we're going to keep going. We're going to try again. It's so different. It's so different than what I conceived it. Okay. Anybody need coffee, water, jumping jacks? Okay. All right. Let's talk about the theme of, if you want anything, get it whenever you want. The theme of atonement. Okay. Let's peel the layer back a little bit more. The flood was judgment for living creatures, because the earth was, and for the earth, it was purification. Right? So the living creatures of wickedness get judged. There is judgment here, right? But for the earth, this giant flood purifies, washes away pollution, and restores its purity. Purging corruption and defilement in order to attain cleanliness and purity, major theme in the Bible, right? And we don't really realize it, but it starts here. It starts with this flood that the land was filled with violence. The land, and this flood just comes and covers it and wipes it and washes it all away, purifies it. Okay. Adam and Eve were purged from the garden and God's presence. In Exodus, Leviticus, which is tomorrow, we will see how God's presence cannot coexist with uncleanness, and blood must atone and wash away impurity. This is where you see all kinds of weird stuff in Leviticus, where it's like, sprinkle blood, put it on your earlobes, kick it, flick it, drink it. Don't drink it, but do all kinds of weird stuff with blood. And you're like, I don't get it. And it's like, it's all about like purifying. It's symbolizing purifying uncleanness, right? The flood is an example. It covers the bad to allow for the good. Okay, here we go. The word used to blot, wipe out by washing, Genesis 6:7, Genesis 7:4, 7:23. The flood is all those words to blot, wipe out by the flood. Those are the same Hebrew words for washing away sins. Psalm 51, Proverbs 6, Isaiah 43, Jeremiah 18, Jeremiah 44. I'm going to wash away, I'm going to blot out, I'm going to wipe away what he did to humanity. This picture of the flood, wiping away like the entire earth and humanity, is the same heart, action, perspective towards the muck inside of you. Like all the violence that's within, that he just wiped out externally, he's like, I will wipe that away from your soul, from your life. I will blot it out the same way I blotted out the earth. And now you've got this parallel. You're like, well, how much am I really forgiven? And how much? He's like, how much did he wipe away everything? He's like, same word. I'm doing the same thing with your sins, with your uncleanness, with your wickedness. And we look back and we go, oh my goodness. And now you can pull little threads. You're like, Paul's like, hey, you're a new creation in Christ. You're like, is that a bumper sticker? Or, oh my goodness, it's tied to the flood, which is tied to a new creation, which is tied to the Spirit of God is in you. The Ruach blew away the chaotic waters and restarted. You're like, it's all, when we get to the New Testament, it's not some separate book. that means we don't need the old book. It'd be like you read Harry Potter 1 through 6. Is there 7 books? Pretend there's 7. You read 6 of them, and then the Deathly Hallows is left, and you're just waiting. You're waiting, and you're waiting, and you're waiting, and like 20 years go by, and then J.K. Rowling finally publishes it. Pretend. You don't go, oh, Harry Potter Volume 2 is so different than Harry Potter Volume 1 that it's so good, I'm just going to read that, because a lot of time went by, and it's like 400 years from Malachi, I think, till Jesus. But it's literally like the last piece of the saga of one whole series. You can't understand Jesus fully if you don't understand the Old Testament. We're just going to keep marching all the way through. These stories are just building, and then Jesus comes and just claims them all. It's crazy. Okay. So all living things emerge after this cosmic washing, blotting out. They emerge reconciled with God. Here's a quote from Michael Morales. The general picture that emerges through primeval history, which is like up to this point, creation till now, is that of a cosmos constructed as a tabernacle with a defiled priestly humanity, Adam, driven ever eastward as a punishment for sin. Because humanity's sin has also defiled the tabernacle itself, the cosmos, the creation, the earth needed to be purified. Like the cosmos, Israel's tabernacle would also be defiled by sin and need to be cleansed, so that, as with the flood, the Day of Atonement would be known as the Day of Judgment, the comprehensive purification that ushered in a new year. When we get to the tabernacle stuff, you'll see that it's all just mountain of God creation, and this weird thing called the Day of Atonement is really this symbolic reset and purifying and covering over and wiping away and blotting out by innocent blood. It's the symbol, but it has to be done every single year. But you look back and you go, God wiped away, purified, covered, blotted out, and he's going to give this like instruction manual to the Israelites and be like, do this every year. Because guess what? You and me and those ancient Israelites are the exact same as all the people before the flood. All of our heart's desires all the time are totally evil. The condition of humanity pre-flood and post-flood is the exact same. Genesis 6:14. Make rooms in the ark, cover it inside and outside with pitch. Remember, God also mentioned, and then cover it with skins, which is something that happens in the tabernacle. One scholar says that covering the pitch in covering the ark in pitch evokes a tie to atonement, which we see later, especially as the ark becomes the place of mercy and ransom when the waters cover over and atone for the violence of the world. Support for this is how the ark rested upon Ararat in the sacred month of Tishri, which is the month the Day of Atonement would later be observed. Specifically, the same day the tabernacle was set up and dedicated in the wilderness. From a cultic perspective, the flood might be categorized as a ritual of restoration, a return to the founded order of creation, precisely the essence of the whole Day of Atonement ritual. So in Genesis 8:13, it came about in the 601st year, in the first month, on the first of the month, the water was dried up upon the land, and Noah removed the covering of the ark. Exodus 42. On the first day of the first month, you shall erect the tabernacle of the tent of meeting. So many little details and phrases and dates, all just as you get farther into the narrative, you look back and you go, whoa, this is like the Louis Armstrong picture. You're like, oh my goodness, it's all playing on the same themes. Okay, Genesis 8. Noah built an altar to Yahweh And he took from every pure animal and every pure bird, and he caused to go up a going up offering on the altar. And Yahweh smelled the soothing smell, and Yahweh said to his heart, I will never again curse the ground on account of humanity, because the purpose of his heart of humanity is bad from his youth. And I will never again strike all life as I did. Will somebody read that first, it's probably just 8:20, the first paragraph on here from their translation?
And Noah built an altar to the Lord and took some of every clean animal and some of every clean bird and offered burnt offerings on the altar.
He offered burnt offerings, right? So we later see the word like the ascension offering. There's a couple different types of offerings in Leviticus, and it gets really confusing. But like the most important offering is an ascension offering. And we translate ascension, to ascend, to go up. It's a going up offering. Okay? This offering is a going up. But what's up? Yahweh is up. God is up. Heaven and earth have separated. God's throne, his heavenly throne, it's in the heavens. It is up. It is out of reach. We'll talk about this in our next session today. I got to get up. I got to get up here. But Noah causes to go up an ascension offering. And it's called, we know that ascension offerings are burnt offerings. And so it's pulling some things together from the translators are looking at the Bible and going, okay, this is a burnt ascension offering, and we're going to call it that. But Tim calls it out so we can really see, like, Noah caused to go up a going up offering on an altar. So, is God stoic? It's easy to see him as stoic, isn't it? It's like Michelangelo painting Sistine Chapel, right? Where God's got the beard, he's like, and Adam's like, yeah. They're touching fingers, you know what I'm talking about? Anybody? Yeah? And like, we get that image in our heads, and we're like, yeah, God's just up there, and he's looking down, he's like, flood. He's like, don't do that. And you know, we get these pictures, or maybe we go the other way, and we're just like, God doesn't really, God's forgiving. Like, I can kind of do whatever I want. He's going to just be forgiving when I meet him someday. Like, it's cool. And we just see, again, it's like the rat chinchilla thing. We're like, we don't see clearly. Do we want to see clearly? Because here is a huge Genesis 1 and 2 and 3. The creation and the exile, which is 3 acts of mercy that we talked about in the exile even. We see this heart of God, and we can't throw arrows at God. We can't see him as heartless or stoic or angry. We get this beautiful picture of a creator God who, even in exiling us, is protecting us from eating and living forever in our broken state. You get this picture of God who promises to come for us, right? And now you get this great reset where justice is metered out to the earth, because for years, generations, lifetimes, nobody's repentant. Everybody just does violence and crazy immoral acts over and over and over. And he still waits and waits and waits and waits 120 years. And then he resets it. And he says, my heart is full of sorrow. And then he starts over with the same broken people and says, I won't do this again. We have this crazy picture of God. So he's not heartless. He's not stoic. Anger isn't his dominant emotion. Does suffering bother God? Let me read from Lois Verberg. It's a page, so give me 2 pages. Give me a minute to read it. But listen to this essay. I have reread this. I don't know how many times, because it's my own struggle with like, who is God and what's his heart. And I wander back to thinking like, I'm not good enough, and he's kind of stoic, and just stuff I make up, frankly. Like, I'm not getting that from the Bible. I'm just like making it up. Like, this is how I feel God must be, so he must be that way. right? Lois slaps me so hard in the face. Thank you, Lois. Okay, here we go. If God is not wounded, if God is not wounded by his people's suffering or angered at their cruelty toward each other, he would be a God who cannot love. God is not indifferent or disinterested. She's referencing the prodigal son. He's an Arab father who's crushed by his son's apparent lack of love. God is a mother bear who roars a warning if you get too close to her cubs. God is a jilted boyfriend who's beside himself when he spots his true love on another guy's arm. Israel's God is not less emotional than we are. He is even more. If you're looking for God's unflinching judgment, the place you'd expect to find it is at the time of Noah. You'd expect to find God nearly exploding with fury at the wicked deeds of humanity, when humankind had filled the world with violence, when every inclination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil all the time. But instead of wrath, the Bible says that God was grieved, that God's heart was full of pain. A murderous gangrene had infected his precious children, causing them to destroy themselves and each other. God's anguish was so great that he even regretted making humankind. Our world today is still filled with violence. We are no different than the generation that made God regret he had created us. When you consider the mass graves of the genocides of this past century, you realize that humans really are capable of evil beyond the limits of imagination. Yet after the flood, God promised, never again will I curse the ground because of man, even though every inclination of his heart is evil from childhood. Never again will I destroy all living creatures as I have done. Here, in the scripture's first pages, I wonder if we don't see God's answer to the classic question, if God is good and all-powerful, why doesn't he destroy evil? In the flood epic, God revealed what his righteous response to human evil would be: universal judgment. God bears with corrupt humanity because the alternative is the death of every sinner on earth. The fact that a good God does not destroy evil is not because he's impotent, it's because he's merciful. We discover God's mercy in his very next words when he makes a covenant in Genesis 9. In this very first covenant he ever made with humankind, he committed to himself to find an answer to sin rather than just destroy sinners. Okay? Let me read that again. In the very first covenant he made with humankind, he committed himself to find another answer to sin rather than just to destroy sinners. In embryonic form, this covenant points towards the coming of Christ. For God, this decision had an enormous price. Walter Brueggemann explains, quote, God resolves that he will stay with, endure, and sustain his world, notwithstanding the sorry state of humankind. It is now clear that such a commitment on God's part is costly. The God-world relation is not simply that of a strong God in a needy world. Now it is a tortured relation between a grieved God and a resistant world. This is a key insight of the gospel against every notion that God stands outside of the hurt as a judge. Terence Freiham also notes, quote, given God's decision to bear with creation in all its wickedness, this means for God a continuing grieving of the heart. Thus, the promise to Noah and all flesh in Genesis 9, 8 through 17 necessitates divine suffering. by deciding to endure a wicked world while continuing to open up the heart to that world, means that God has decided to take personal suffering upon God's own self. God opts to suffer alongside his people because he loves them in spite of their sinfulness. From the moment he made that decision, we see the passionate love that ultimately led to the cross to bring his prodigal children back to him. And we see his overwhelming joy when a single sinner repents and turns homeward. The more you see God's heart, the more you see the character of Christ from the very first pages of Genesis. Our dual images of God in the Testament start to merge together when we see the sufferings of Christ began in his Father's heart at the dawn of creation, when we see God our Father bearing the cross for our sins. It's only when we focus the two images into one that we gain spiritual depth perception and begin to grasp how wide and long and high and deep is the love of God. I love that. So if God, before the flood, says, I am grieved because of what I see, and then after the flood, he sees the same stuff in all of us forever, we can infer that his heart is in a permanent state of grief. And he chooses to bear with us and hopes that we would turn to him. I love that. Okay. Whew. Genesis 9, 20, and 21. Noah is righteous and blameless. Is he the seed? And Noah began to be a man of the ground, and he planted a vineyard, and he drank some wine and got drunk, and he uncovered himself in the middle of his tent. I talked to us the other day. This incredible story about resetting creation to dwell in God's presence on a mountain garden ends the same way as the first creation, naked and ashamed. So if Noah isn't the seed of the woman, then who is? The story concludes in Genesis 10, another genealogy of death. And there's one line in here. The line of Ham, Genesis 10, 9 through 10. Like Nimrod, a mighty hunter before Yahweh, the beginning of his kingdom was Babylon. He also had like Nineveh and Assyria. It was started some bad cities. But we're going to go into Tower of Babel next, and we're seeing this thread trace. We restart through the genealogy. Where's the seed? Where's the seed? I don't know, but there's a dude named Ham who's got a son, and da-da-da-da, and now there's Nimrod, and he's going to have a kingdom that begins in Babylon. Genesis 10, 32 to 11:2. These are the families of the sons of Noah, according to their genealogies, by their nations, and out of these nations were separated on the land after the flood. Now the whole land was one language and one in words, and it came about as they journeyed. Anybody want to guess the direction? East. I don't know why it's never like north or south. It's always east, you know? Anyways, as they journeyed east, that they found opposite of a mountain, a plain in the land of Shinar, and they settled there. They returned west to God's mountain? No, that's been obliterated by the flood. They go farther east. They go to a plain. And the next section, we're going to find out what happens in our grand story next. Apparently I skipped the slide with the covenant. Let's read it really quick. Behold, I establish my covenant with you and your offspring after you. Every living creature with you. Never again shall all flesh be cut off by waters of the flood. Never again shall there be a flood to destroy the earth. And God said, this is the sign of the covenant that I will make between me and you and every living creature for all future generations. I've set my bow in the cloud, and it shall be a sign of the covenant between me and the earth. And when I bring clouds over the earth and my bow is seen in the clouds, I will remember my covenant that is between me and you and every living creature of all flesh, and the waters shall never again become a flood to destroy all flesh. No, he didn't make this covenant right at the end of the flood. He made it after Noah made a going up offering. So Noah makes this sacrificial offering on an altar, and that rises to Yahweh and appeases this sacrifice that Noah makes, appeases God, and he responds with this covenant. Might be a little small. It's kind of a fun little diagram of our one story, our one narrative so far, right? We got land, Eden, garden up here, snake, cool horse, right? Exile, outside the garden, there's the altar of the brothers. The brothers are divided. Cain kills Abel. He starts his own city outside the mountain of God. More bloodshed comes from his city and his line. And then it goes down, down, down. Through Seth, we see Noah, sons. There's a cosmic rebellion with the sons of Elohim and illicit sex. And we get this new setup. Humanity goes on top of the mountain. Starts all over with blessing, be fruitful and multiply, with another altar that appeases the Lord. And then his line comes out, and we see Ham, seed of the serpent, with Babylon, Nimrod, a scattering, Babylon is another cosmic rebellion. But the line of Shem keeps our hope alive. 10 generations later, we get to Terah, who goes to Abraham. So we're going to trace I think Abraham actually we're going to talk about Abraham in the next section as well.